This is an ABC News special report.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kira Phillips. We are coming on the air because ABC News has now confirmed Iran has just launched a retaliatory missile attack targeting Israel. A U.S. senior administration official telling ABC News now that Iran is expected to fire 240 to 250 missiles at 4 targets in Israel. This includes the Mossad headquarters, Israel's spy agency, 3 Israeli air bases. We are told it'll take about 15 minutes to actually reach their targets. The U.S. and Israeli military with their defenses at the ready at this moment, including Israel's Iron Dome. Israel has ordered residents now in Jerusalem to shelter in place. The White House had signaled a potential strike was imminent. The attack follows a rapid escalation of violence in the Middle East, something we've been covering for weeks now, including an Israeli airstrike killing Hezbollah's leader in Beirut. Iran launching a direct attack on Israel in April, but few of its missiles and rockets actually reached their intended targets. Many were shot down by the U.S. coalitions in the region. This comes as the Israeli military now says its troops were conducting limited ground raids in southern Lebanon. Let's get straight to our Ian panel in Beirut. Ian, what can you tell us at this moment?
Yeah, hi there, Kira. I mean, this is clearly underway. There have been a lot of fears that this was coming, especially after the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah for almost 3 decades. The live pictures that we're now seeing, certainly over the skies in Tel Aviv, show a lot of lights in the air. Now, what's unclear is whether these are ballistic missiles. We believe Iran has fired over 100 ballistic missiles. We certainly know that the Iron Dome and other air defenses are in operation, and this is happening right as we speak. A nationwide emergency alert to all Israelis to shelter. All our colleagues, people with friends and family, are all hiding now, basically in bunkers. Many people in their homes, they have kind of makeshift shelters, and everyone is now underground. This came shortly after a terrorist attack in Israel. We're told that this is possibly the first of 4 waves of attacks. Now, this is almost, if the 250 figure is right, that's almost double the size of the attack that took place in April. Remember, Iran attacking at that time. We suspected that there would be an attack, but this is significantly larger. Israel has warned all of its citizens to take all precautions to try and stay underground if they can. We're certainly hearing the sounds of explosions from Tel Aviv in that feed that is coming from some of the television cameras there. So clearly terrifying moments for people on the ground. And then eventually we'll start to talk about what the response is. Israel has been very clear that if Iran attacks Israel, it is going to respond, and the response is going to be very severe. So we just have to wait and see. 99% of the missiles that were fired at Israel back in April were intercepted. This is double the size. That's a huge test of Israel's resources. Remember, you've got American service personnel on the ground there, as well as American citizens. You've got the U.S. Embassy and obviously lots of other foreign nationals as well. So this will be a terrifying night for many people. You know, we're hearing the sounds of explosions. Again, it's hard at this point to know whether these are intercepts or whether some of these missiles are actually going through. So to stress, we know that this first wave of attacks is now underway. We're told there could be 4. And this first wave is over 100 ballistic missiles. There could be as many as 250 in total. Israel has warned that there will be a strong response to Iran. It's been planning this to how to retaliate for a long time, but especially that's been ramped up ever since Hassan Nasrallah was killed. People in this part of the world, here in Lebanon, have been waiting for an Iranian response. Many people have been crying out for it, especially in the Shia world. There's a lot of pressure on Iran to try and respond because its proxies here in Lebanon and elsewhere, certainly Hamas in Gaza, have been under immense pressure from Israel, trying to break this so-called axis of resistance. And this is the response from Iran. But a huge gamble by Iran and a very dangerous night for Israel.
And as you mentioned, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made it very clear when he was in New York just last week, Ian, saying if indeed Iran was to strike, that they could absolutely expect for Israel to strike back. We are following right now. If you are just tuning in, ABC News has now learned, our Ian panel confirming that Iran has just launched a retaliatory missile attack targeting Israel. Our Matt Gutman now in Tel Aviv. Matt, I understand you have been able to take cover. You are in a shelter. Bring us up to date. What do you know at this moment?
Here, about 90 minutes ago, the first alert started to go out on people's cell phones nationwide, alerting them to start getting towards sheltered areas, bomb shelters, not to congregate. And over the past 15 minutes, they have become much more frequent. Then we heard the announcement from the IDF that Iran's missile attack has begun. And a short time later, we got those messages on our phone: evacuate, immediately move as soon as you can to any kind of bomb shelter. We heard the sirens a short time after that. I'll give you a sense of where we are. It's just a room in this hotel. You can see it's got an air vent as well. We're perfectly safe where we are. We have the rest of our team here on the other side. But this is what most of Israel looks like right now. We don't know how many missiles. We hear 100. It could be more in the coming hours. That remains to be determined. Just as we were running into the shelter, I saw some of those interceptors go up into the atmosphere to try to take out those missiles. It is possible that there have been hits, and the IDF has said all day that they're preparing for this and that the air defenses are solid. They worked in the past in April, knocking out 99% of the missiles, drones, and cruise missiles fired from Iran. But the IDF saying it's not hermetic. We understand at this point that several major Israeli military bases in the Tel Aviv area in the south were targeted. They were evacuated earlier today in recent hours. It was known that that was likely what Iran is going to target. Unclear the damage right now. We're inside, unable to get bulletins, but Israel's obviously bracing for a very, very long night. And it happens, Kira, on the back of what appears to be a shooting attack just about a mile from where we are. Two armed men entering a train. We understand it was a terrorist attack, according to police, shooting a number of people. Several of them have been critically wounded. So a very jarring night for Israelis here after those successes in Lebanon over the past couple of weeks. And the sirens still going on, Kira.
Our Matt Gutman there in a shelter in Tel Aviv. Our Martha Raddatz, Chief Global Affairs Correspondent, joining us on the phone now. Martha, if you could let us know where you are headed, and just your thoughts here. This strike, clearly a significant escalation. That means a significant amount of risks, and the looming question of how wide this war could become.
Exactly, and I think what the U.S. official who I spoke to today, the senior U.S. official, the greatest concern is that some of those missiles will get through. As we have been reporting in the last little while, 99% of them were intercepted in April, but there is fear that that will not hold this time, and that indeed would point to a wider war. Iran launching perhaps as many as 250 missiles, as we've said, towards Israel. They are certainly aware of the Iron Dome and that the U.S. also has defense mechanisms up as well. But there is a possibility some of those missiles will get through, and what kind of damage they would do will really look towards what kind of response Israel makes. A U.S. official told me it is 100% certainty that Israel will respond to this, and in a vigorous way, even if those missiles do not get through. But if there are injuries, if people are injured, if infrastructure is taken out, if any part of those air bases is taken out, this will significantly increase the chances of a wider war. And that response, again, we don't know when that response will be, but Israel is taking this slow. It also, Kira, they decided not to make a preemptive strike, even Israel, even though they knew these missiles were coming, Iran taking that first hit. And another thing we have to remember, Kira, is we are just days away from the anniversary of October 7th, when Hamas entered Israel and conducted that horrific terrorist attack on Israel. And this is the fallout from all of that.
And just looking at the timeline, Martha, from October 7th, 2023, when Hamas took on that horrendous attack, killing all those innocent people during that music festival, and then looking at a momentary ceasefire between Israel and Hamas a month later. But since then, the deaths of Hamas leaders, commanders within Hamas, other political leaders throughout other countries. And then just in September, the pager explosions that killed Hezbollah leaders in Lebanon, all the way to just last week, and Hezbollah's commander Nasrallah, Hassan Nasrallah, killed in that Israeli airstrike. How do you see this playing out right now as we talk about Iran expecting to launch 240 to 250 missiles in a number of waves here, 4 targets there in Israel, Mossad headquarters, 3 air bases? Martha, stay with us. Let's get back to Matt Gutman. He's in that shelter in Tel Aviv. Matt, bring us up to date.
Kira, we just actually ran out from the shelter to see what was going on outside. The sirens had stopped. They've started again, so we're going to go back towards the shelter. But we just saw something incredibly unusual. There are Israeli soldiers fully kitted out running in the streets, looking like they were looking for something in a bus just downstairs. This country is on tenterhooks right now. It's hard to describe how intense the feeling is for so many Israelis who've been running in and out of these bomb shelters over the past, I guess, half an hour or so. No reports yet about direct hits. We don't know about damage. But again, as the IDF has been saying, we're just going to round this corner. Their missile defense system, as robust as it is, also developed with, take the other one, also developed with the United States, does not provide a hermetic seal against these ballistic missiles coming from Iran. So it's presumed that some of them might get through. We don't know how long this is going to be going on. Martha reported earlier that a very large number of missiles is inbound towards Israel. The Israeli government, of course, has said it will retaliate. We've seen what they've been able to do in Lebanon against Hezbollah over the past couple of weeks. The intelligence apparatus is working very well. I would say that their success, according to them, has been unprecedented. It's unclear what they might have in store for Iran. But what has been quite obvious over the past weeks and months is that they have been able to infiltrate the Iranian intelligence system and the government as well. So they know what the vulnerable points are. We don't know when the retaliation might come. It might not be immediate. But again, right now, everybody in Israel continues to brace and hunker down in their bomb shelters across this country. We don't even know the scope of the missile launches at this point. Don't know how many are intercepted, but clearly this is a more significant and larger barrage than we saw in April. Iran is trying to clearly send a message after its main proxy, Hezbollah in Lebanon, has been nearly decimated by Israel's attacks over the past couple of weeks, Kira.
You know, we talk about the last year. We're coming up on marking October 7th, a year since Hamas attacked Israel. Let me ask you this as well, as you are there in Tel Aviv, Matt. Do you believe there's also a significance to striking so close to a high holiday? I mean, Jewish New Year starts at sundown tomorrow.
I think there is, Kira. I think Jewish New Year starts tomorrow. It is the biggest holiday in Israel. It's sort of like Christmas and New Year's in one here. It's followed by Yom Kippur a few days later, which is the Day of Atonement in Israel. And that is the anniversary on the Jewish calendar of the October 7th attack. So there might be some symbolism there as well. We don't exactly know what is in the mind of the Iranian regime right now. We do know that they feel humiliated after the round of attacks by Israel on Iranian assets across the Middle East. In Yemen, we saw the Houthis being barraged at the Hodeidah port, blown up. Hezbollah in Lebanon has been attacked severely. They are in complete disarray, and Iran clearly felt like it needed some sort of response. And it's unclear that this will be the final response. What does seem apparent, though, is that they broadcast that they were targeting military bases, military installations, and that the attacks are coming later at night. Means there's probably less traffic. It seems that they're also trying to mitigate possible civilian casualties. Seems, we don't know that for sure, but that was the modus operandi in the previous attack as well, which came overnight. Unclear exactly what is in the mind of Iran, but clearly they are trying to send a message to Israel, and the next step is going to be a very difficult one. But just to go back to October 7th, Kira, you mentioned the symbolism there. Israel was just starting to recover from the horrors of October 7th and the humiliation that its own intelligence system and its own military suffered at the hands of Hamas, that surprise attack that left over 1,200 Israelis dead. And they had just started to feel like they've regained traction. And with what happened in Lebanon and the new assault there, the ability to clear a part of southern Lebanon without Israeli casualties so far. So this is still rolling. And as Martha warned, there is a significant concern here of a greater regional war breaking out because of the attacks tonight, Kira.
And Martha, let me take it to you as we look at the two waves that are supposed to take place here and the targets, including air bases, in addition to Mossad headquarters. Do we think that there are U.S. personnel at any of those air bases, Martha?
I am told there are U.S. personnel at some of those bases in Israel. And again, the defense forces are up as solid as they possibly can be. I think what you have seen, and Matt mentioned this as well, the intelligence on Hezbollah has been remarkable. The Israelis have really concentrated on that since 2006 and have significantly harmed the Hezbollah structure. I'm just back from Israel. I arrived in Israel the day those pagers went off in Lebanon. It's quite extraordinary. I'm actually on a train to New York City right now, and I am still getting those alerts from Tel Aviv on an app on my phone to take cover as these missiles approach Tel Aviv and other places around Israel. Again, this is expected, according to a senior official, to come in waves. So you may see dozens and dozens, or perhaps 100 in this first wave, and then more after that. And they will assess the damage as soon as they possibly can, the Israelis, and to calibrate their response. I am told by a senior official that one of the responses will be on energy structure in Iran. They will certainly try to cause damage to Iran, and hopefully back off.
Steve Ganyard, I want to bring you in as our ABC News consultant with military and intelligence background. As you are watching what's happening right now, clearly we are entering a new phase of this conflict. Asking Martha about U.S. personnel at some of these air bases, apparently a part of the targets that Iran wants to hit. What would it take in this scenario right now for the U.S. to take a bigger role? Would it mean our U.S. forces in any way, shape, or form being hurt within this conflict? How do you see the U.S. playing a bigger role here, if at all?
Yeah, Kara, I think that the U.S. is doing what they did in April right now. We'll see what happens after the attack is over. But remember, we have U.S. Navy ships offshore of Israel that have the ability to bring down Iranian ballistic missiles. We also have some of that ability in Jordan. If any of these attacks are with cruise missiles, there are U.S. squadrons who are based in Jordan who were key, instrumental last time in stopping some of those attacks back in April. We also have ships in the Red Sea. So to some degree, the U.S. has said that they will help defend Israel. So we just don't know how much involvement that will be. Now, just watching the video, I think that what Matt and Ian and Martha have been talking about this concern about the incoming Iranian missiles overwhelming Israeli defenses may be coming to pass. Unconfirmed, but it does look like there are some impacts around Tel Aviv. We'll have to wait to confirm that. But the number of missiles incoming has always been the concern. There are 3 layers of defense within Israel. We all know about the Iron Dome, which is actually lower altitude. There's a mid-level kind of capability called David Sling, and then the very high altitude that will actually intercept these Iranian ballistic missiles in outer space is called Arrow. So it's a layered defense, but again, so many incoming missiles that we do have to be concerned about the threat of overwhelming and saturating Israeli defenses.
Mary Bruce, let's take it to you at the White House, our chief White House correspondent. I see that the president is putting out messages on Twitter now, about 17 minutes ago, saying that this morning he and the vice president convened with our national security team to discuss Iranian plans to launch an imminent missile attack against Israel. We discussed how the United States is prepared to help Israel defend against these attacks and protect American personnel in the region. What more do we know, Mary?
Well, we certainly know that the White House and the president are monitoring all of this extremely closely. The president and the vice president, they're convening that meeting, as you mentioned, with the national security team at the White House earlier this morning. And we learned from a senior White House official this morning that the U.S. is actively supporting defensive preparations to defend Israel against this very attack. And then that key line, the White House official saying a direct military attack from Iran against Israel will carry severe consequences for Iran. Of course, lots of questions now about what that means. We have, of course, seen the president in recent days speak out forcefully on this, adamant that an all-out war in the Middle East has to be avoided. The big question is how, as you continue to see the escalation continue, Kira.
Mary, thank you. Let's take it back to our Ian panel in Beirut. Ian, bring us up to date on what is happening there, what you're hearing now.
Yeah, Kira, I mean, look, we've been talking for ages about the risks of escalation. Well, I think we can just say this has escalated, and whether anyone can put a lid on it is an open question. What we're seeing right now is, you can't see it clearly on the camera, is the red dots of tracer fire going into the sky from the southern suburbs. This is Dahya, this is Hezbollah stronghold, the area that's been repeatedly hammered by the Israelis over the last couple of weeks, and people are out on the streets celebrating. Remember, Iran set up this so-called axis of resistance. It was Hamas, it was Hezbollah, other groups as well, especially in Iraq, some of the Shia militias, which are pro-Iranian as well. And we're getting reports, again, not verified in any way, that perhaps there's been some incident near an airbase in Iraq. We certainly saw an attempted attack yesterday by pro-Iranian militias on a base that's believed to house U.S. forces. So for many people, certainly on this side of the border, this will give them succor. They feel that they will be emboldened by what's happening now in Israel, that they're being supported. Iran basically set up Hezbollah, and it has been the major thorn in Israel's side, other than Iran itself. As Matt said, they've been severely weakened over the last few weeks with the pager attacks, then the death of Nasrallah, and these targeted assassinations. Almost its entire leadership has basically been erased. So Hezbollah has been all at sea. We know that Israel has now moved across the border here. So just step back and think about this for a moment. You mentioned this yourself. What began as this terrible attack inside Israel on the kibbutzim at the music festival then grew to that attack in Gaza. Then we saw it stretch to the West Bank. Hezbollah here joined that attack on Israeli forces pretty much for the last year, and now Israel has responded in force. We're talking about 100 missiles here. I mean, Lebanon has received thousands of attacks over the last week or so. Parts of this country are totally decimated. Around a million people have been forced from their homes, and the casualties are something like 1,600. So again, many people, certainly here, who are pro-Hezbollah, will say this is payback for Israel. And there will be many other people in Iraq as well, and in Syria, and probably in Yemen, who will also share that view, and they will feel emboldened by this. So attacks in the Red Sea are possible, attacks on U.S. interests in Iraq are possible, further fire from Hezbollah into Israel, this fear that this could develop into a wider conflict. It's kind of happening. It's just whether, when Israel responds, which it will do, to the Iranian attack, whether a lid can be put on it, as happened after April. In some senses, it was calibrated. I'm not convinced that this looks calibrated in the same way, and especially given the Israeli warnings. So we really could be about to see the start of something much bigger. I don't want to scaremonger, but the risks now, when you start having missiles flying into Israel, attacks here, attacks in Iran, attacks in Iraq, then things start to look potentially out of control.
Ian, let's take it from you right back to our Matt Gutman, who's out of the shelter now there in Tel Aviv. He is out on the balcony. Just in light of what Ian just said, Matt, the question remains, as phase one here on behalf of Iran has now taken place, how will Israel respond? How long will Israel wait? What is Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu doing at this moment?
I can tell you what he's been doing over the past 15, 20 years, Kira, and that has been selecting targets. This is something that Israeli intelligence has been talking about for a long time. They know where they want to hit in Iran. They have been thinking about this. They have been accumulating intelligence through analysts, through agents on the ground for many years. They have been prepared for this. They have both the defensive capabilities to knock those missiles out of the sky that are incoming and offensive capabilities in terms of its air force and their own missiles that are capable of hitting Iran. What they select, how hard they intend to go remains obviously the biggest question at this point. And I think a lot of it depends on the damage we see here in the coming hours, Kira. We're being told by security sources that the IDF is about to put out the latest bulletin about possible damage. Some of those missiles, or parts of them, have come through. We don't know if there are any casualties yet, but I'm told that they're going to inform us in the coming minutes of what happened. I don't think, from my understanding from just speaking to a military source, that there's any severe damage at that point, and that will certainly calibrate the kind of response that we're going to see from Israel. Just as we got out to this balcony again, we heard additional booms of those interceptors. Now, all of this aerial warfare, Kira, is happening tens of thousands of feet in the air, and those booms that we hear are delayed by seconds. The intercept's happening way out, probably 15 miles from where we are. I saw a couple of them go out just before we ran into the shelter. Now, when we talk about those ballistic missiles, you know, we tend to think of rockets, but these are big. They're almost as long as a bus. And I saw one of the missiles that landed in April, and it was about 38 feet long, minus the engine and minus the cone that housed the actual warhead. So just the fuel tank itself was 38 feet. So these are massive weapons. When they are launched and when they fall, and even parts of them fall, they can cause some pretty catastrophic damage. Now, we understand that Israel's main military bases in the Tel Aviv area, the one that houses its intelligence offices, the Mossad, have been evacuated. Israel's headquarters, at least partially evacuated. Other bases evacuated. They knew this was coming. They tried to get their people out of the way. But I want to show you something else that's happening right now. People are kind of back on the roads. You see police, but there is some traffic, people moving to and fro in the lulls between these sirens. We don't know if there's another wave. It's being reported that there have been well over 100, maybe 50% more than that, missiles fired at this point towards the center of Israel and possibly the south. Everybody here is bracing for additional missiles, I think, certainly before talking about what's next, although I think what is clear, Kira, is that there is going to be a next. The question is, does it happen in Lebanon? Does it happen direct on Iran? It's unclear. One more thing about the missiles, if you'll indulge me. Iran learned from April when it launched 300 cruise missiles and drones and missiles. The cruise missiles and drones were all intercepted. The only thing that got through were those ballistic missiles. That's a siren that's not related to us. That's a police siren. So the only missiles that got through were the ballistic kind, those bus-sized missiles. That's why they only fired those on this round. That's my assumption, at least. And it does appear that some have managed to evade Israel's aerial defense array. Kira.
So let's put this in perspective then, Matt, as you just described the ballistic missile in detail, its capability, its size, the kind of destruction it can leave behind. If we look back to Iran launching it was about 120 ballistic missiles and dozens of cruise missiles and hundreds of drones back in April. You were saying 99% of those were intercepted. Our Martha Raddatz also telling us that as well. Now Iran expected to carry out 2 waves here and launch 240 to 250 missiles, aiming at 4 targets there in Israel, including Mossad headquarters and 3 air bases. Let's talk about, although we want to remind folks when Iran launched those missiles last time around and 99% of them were intercepted, we are talking about double this time around and 2 waves.
Yeah, the potential for damage is much more significant. The biggest concern is the swarming factor, right? If they fire a lot of them at once, Israel's air defenses are incapable of handling, of filtering through all of the missiles. Had they fired maybe 200 at once, it would have been an even bigger threat. But still, salvos of several dozen at a time offers a very complex algorithm for the air defenses to try to knock down. So there's a lot of deconfliction that happens with those missiles. And you talked about the missiles itself and the damage that they can cause. It really depends on what is loaded in the warhead, right? It can be a chemical or biological weapon. It can have a significant amount of ammunition, of explosives, and that also determines how far these missiles go. So if you want them to go farther, you load them with less explosives. And that's what we don't know yet. What was on these things? We don't think that there's any threat of chemical, biological, or atomic warfare at all at this point, but how much explosives were loaded on them, how far did they go, and what specific targets did they hit? We know that some pieces of those missiles have hit Israel. We don't know where and what kind of damage and whether there were casualties at this point. But again, loaded fully with a lot of explosives, of high-end explosives. These kinds of missiles can take out a small apartment building, as Ian and I and Martha have seen in Ukraine. They can do a lot of damage if there is a direct hit, Kira.
All right, let's take it to you, Steve. Dig a little deeper here on the capability of these missiles. This is absolutely your forte. Your thoughts on the kind of damage that we could see here as we are awaiting now a second wave of missile attacks on behalf of Iran.
Yeah, Kerry, I think the important point here is that a ballistic missile carries between about 1,000 and 2,000 pounds of high explosive, if that is in fact the payload. But the other part of this is coming in from outer space. So it's probably going several Mach, almost 5, 6, 7 by the time it re-enters the atmosphere. And then that momentum of all that explosive is what creates such damage when they do impact here. But again, the Israelis have the ability to knock these kinds of missiles down. It just depends on how many are incoming. They're very expensive to have a ballistic missile defense, and so the numbers are limited. So we'll see how many have gotten through. They also have the ability to look and see where the impact would be anticipated. So if a ballistic missile was going to land in what they knew was an unpopulated area, the computer within the firing unit would say, oh, I'm not going after that one because I know it's going to land harmlessly. So they have the ability to have that discrimination about whether the missile is going to have an impact either directly or near an airbase. I think, Kira, it's very important to understand here that this is a capability that's very expensive. It's very complex. The Israelis have it because a lot of it has been co-developed with the U.S. The Iranians have nothing. So when the Israelis come to retaliate, and however they do, the Iranians will have no defense against this kind of attack. Israel has all sorts of types of missiles, the same munitions that the Iranians have, even better. And so when the retaliatory attack by Israel onto Iran comes, it will be a very, very different outcome because the Iranians just do not have the kinds of defensive capabilities that the Israelis do.
Let me follow up with that, Steve. Now that Hamas and Hezbollah have largely had their leadership and ability to communicate eliminated, is Iran in this fight against Israel alone?
Well, most of their proxies have been degraded to the point that they're truly ineffective. The Houthis have taken a punch in the nose from the Israelis that have quieted them for the past couple of days. We know what's going on in Gaza with Hamas. We know what's going on in Lebanon with Hezbollah. The Shia militias within Iraq have been quite quiet. And so what undoubtedly happened here is Iran felt that they had been humiliated and they had to respond in some way, knowing that Israel was going to come back and take retribution. So the Iranians are probably preparing for that. I think what's interesting here is what Martha alluded to, and that is that the Israelis have discussed that this retribution will be against economic targets. When you hear that, and you hear it in reference to Iran, think oil. So the lifeblood of the Iranian economy, the lifeblood of the Iranian government, of the regime, is based on oil money. Who's the biggest consumer of that oil? China. So we're looking to, this is going to become a global issue here if the Israelis do, in fact, go after places like Karg Island, which is the major oil transshipment point for Iranian oil, or someplace around the Strait of Hormuz where all of that oil not just from Iran, but for all the Gulf states transit. So keep an eye on oil markets here, because they don't like things to be unsettled. And if they can't get the oil that comes from the Persian Gulf countries out of the Persian Gulf countries through the shipborne means, then this is going to have a global effect on economies as well.
Steve Ganyard, thank you. And if you are just tuning in right now, you are watching breaking news here on ABC. Iran firing missiles into Israel at this hour. Residents told to remain close to bomb shelters. As you can hear the air raids and the sirens, the air raid sirens sounding across the country right now. And as we are watching these live pictures, and there in Tel Aviv is our Matt Gutman, also our Ian Panel in Beirut, our Steve Ganyard also with us from the military and security side of things. As we watch this overseas, there are concerns here at home. Enhanced security already taking place, we know, in New York City. Our Aaron Katursky has been talking with his sources here back in the U.S. What do we know, Aaron, as soon as it was announced that indeed Iran has started its two-wave attack here? The first one already in order. The second one, we are waiting. 4 targets in Israel now of concern. What are the domestic concerns now, particularly in New York, as you are talking with law enforcement at this hour?
Jewish high holidays, Kira, and law enforcement officials had been monitoring developments in the Mideast for this very kind of retaliatory attack that now appears to be taking place across the skies of Israel. So far, we have heard of no specific threats to the U.S. homeland. Law enforcement has been anticipating something like this and deploying to sensitive Jewish locations in advance of the high holidays and in advance of the October 7th anniversary. Kira, it's important to say the NYPD is meeting right now to decide whether they need to do any additional deployments around New York City, but they have been on this kind of alert level for weeks now because of what's been happening overseas and the concerns that it brings at home. In particular, they've been paying attention to what Matt Gutman's been reporting about some kind of an attack with a number of casualties coming outside of a subway system and maybe onto a bus. So the police here in this country are paying particular attention for any kind of copycats, Kira.
Steve Ganyard, let me take that to you. Firsthand experience. If we think of attacks that have happened across the country, there always is a fear back here at home that citizens of the United States will be targeted as well. Since the Hamas attacks in Israel, we have been on high alert here in the United States over the past year. Your thoughts as New York is already responding with regard to security? Could we start to see this, say, at synagogues across the U.S.? As Aaron mentions, the high holiday. We're coming up on 1 year since the October 7th attack, and now Iran launching one of what we are told will be 2 waves of attacks into Israel.
Yeah, I think times have changed, and the number of terrorist groups that were striking around the world, this kind of global effort has diminished over time. And really, what we're seeing now is this is Israel against Iran. And so, in the past, the Iranians have been supportive of attacks against U.S. troops with the Quds Force and their IRGC, but they also know that President Biden has put them on notice that if they come after the U.S., that the U.S. will come back at them. So the Iranians had benefited in the past of having these proxies, these cutouts, these, look at Hamas. It's a Sunni organization supporting a Shia state. And so it's the enemy of my enemy makes strange bedfellows, but it doesn't mean that the Iranians have wide networks that are going to be capable or willing to make attacks directly within the U.S. homeland or on U.S. forces. Doesn't mean something like that won't happen. It's just less likely here now that this is sort of a direct confrontation with the Iranian regime rather than a broader Islamic effort against Western targets that we had seen in the past.
And the question remains, as we continue to hear the air raid sirens, what exactly is Israel going to do next? Avi Melamed, former Israeli intelligence analyst, on the phone with me now. Avi, as you are watching these live pictures and following now what Iran says is, or what Israel has now confirmed as Iran firing these missiles into Israel, residents told to shelter in place. How do you see this unfolding?
Well, Kira, thank you for having me. I think that we should expect a massive Israeli retaliation in a volume and scale that the Mullah regime in Tehran has not experienced yet. The Mullah regime has conducted sort of an act of despair, trying to stop the avalanche of its proxies following the major blows that Hezbollah, the major proxy of the Iranians, sustained in the last couple of weeks. It may be counterproductive because the Israeli expected counter-retaliation to the attack on Israel may result in a very dire situation for the Mullah regime.
I think we lost contact with Avi. We will try to bring him back into the conversation. Ian Panel, let me take it back to you in Beirut. Are we hearing anything on behalf of Iran?
Yeah, in fact, we've had a couple of statements in the last hour or so. First of all, the Iranians released still images, photos of some of those missiles being launched. They were sent to a semi-official state news agency. First statement comes from the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Command. It says that the operation was conducted based on a decision made in the Supreme National Security Council and with the support of the army. It says that the attacks were partly in retaliation for the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. You remember that happened earlier this year. He, of course, was the leader of Hamas, as well as Hassan Nasrallah, who, of course, was the leader of Hezbollah. It says that the order was given by the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. Also a statement from the Iranian mission. This is at the United Nations, where you are in New York, saying Iran's legal, rational and legitimate response to the terrorist acts of the Zionist regime, this is what the Iranians say, has been duly carried out. They then go on to warn Israel, should Israel carry out any kind of response or commit further acts of malevolence, a subsequent and crushing response will ensue. They're also warning other countries who are allied with Israel to not side with them and to distance themselves. So they're certainly feeling very emboldened by this. We have colleagues in Iraq right now, colleagues in Jordan, and they're all seeing the same thing. They're seeing these missiles flying over. This cuts to a lot of the divisions throughout this region between Shia and Sunni world, and it forces people to pick sides. And that's why it's also, I think, kind of a very dangerous situation. Iran now warning Israel not to respond. Israel almost certainly will respond. So does that then lead to a ratcheting up, which is the very thing that President Biden has been at pains to say repeatedly he wants to avoid? This is what American diplomacy has been directed towards. This is why Antony Blinken's been constantly shuttling backwards and forwards to try and calm the mood. But frankly, that diplomacy has failed. Calmer voices have not prevailed. And certainly right now, we're looking at a devastating night for Israel. Here in Lebanon, the attacks continue. Nearly 1 million people forced from their homes. This has been a terrible 2 weeks for Lebanon. The situation we know in Gaza has been absolutely awful. You've also got the West Bank, and now the possibility that it then spreads to Iran. So I think we're in a very, very dangerous moment for the Middle East, and it will affect America, it will affect Europe, and most of all, it's going to affect the people who live here, who don't really get a say in the decisions of their political and military masters. Kira?
Ian, thank you. Let's take it back to you, Avi, playing off exactly what Ian Panel is talking about here, and that is, what would this retaliation look like? You say it will be massive. If we think back to July, when Hamas's political leader was taken out by an Israeli drone in Tehran, in country, right there in Iran, what does that say about Israel, its capabilities, and what it's willing to do within what you describe as a massive Israeli retaliation? How deep into Iran will Israel go, and how will they do it, Avi?
Well, Kira, as you may recall, the previous attack, the Iran attacked Israel in April 13, 14, there was a symbolic Israeli retaliation. Reportedly, Israeli jets targeted a specific location next to, deep in the area of Iran, and the area of Natanz, which is one of their major facilities. So in the last couple of months since then, we have witnessed more than time the ability of Israel to strike hard thousands of miles away from the state of Israel. The most recent attack was on the Hodeidah port in Yemen and other locations in Yemen, some 1,200 miles away from Israel. So in that regard, we do have some good glimpse, sort of speaking, understanding what Israel can do. And I would expect that there will be maybe a combined Israeli retaliation, basically. But as I said before, I would expect a massive Israeli retaliation.
And how soon do you see that happening, Avi? What exactly is Prime Minister Netanyahu waiting for here? What is he watching? What is he talking about with his military leaders? How is he plotting his retaliation at this moment?
I think that the retaliation is imminent. We should expect it in a very short period of time. I don't think this is something that is going to continue for a long period of time, and I think it will happen soon.
And at what point does Netanyahu pull back? How far does he go? How deep does this go? How long does this go, Avi?
Well, look, we have to look at the wider context. Israel has been threatened, and other states in the region has been threatened by Iran and their proxies, the axis of resistance, for the last 40 years. This is a moment of truth to the region. This is a moment of truth to the international community. What the Syria will understand today is, unfortunately, the bitter fruit of many years of rapprochement and policy conducted by Western powers that basically came to terms with the Iranian growing threat. And this was inevitable, and this is, in the end of the day, it's just happening, unfolding in front of our eyes. We are in a very pivotal moment, and I personally believe that we could exit this pivotal moment into a better environment and future for the people of the region. But that calls for ending once and for all the Iranian threat, or the Iranian regime ability to continue and to dictate its radical agenda and terrorizing the Middle East. This is the moment of truth. We have reached this moment.
Avi, let me ask you, as a former Israeli intelligence analyst that knows firsthand how an operation like this on behalf of Israel would go down, will go down. As you know, our president here, President Joe Biden, has been calling for a ceasefire, has been trying to broker a ceasefire, has been calling for peace in the Middle East. I'm going to ask you a very direct question right now. Is that, at this point, seeing what we're seeing right now, is that even an option? Is that even possible at this point? Or is a ceasefire just completely off the table right now?
No, I think that at this point the ceasefire is off the table right now. We are now in the big game, the direct Israeli-Iranian collision, a scenario that I was predicting accurately in the past in my recent book, Inside the Middle East, that was published in 2022. We are exactly in this place. This is the time for the big game. This is the time to make the big decisions. There is no more room for avoiding the confrontation. The time has come.
Avi, thank you. Let's take it straight to the White House. Our Mary Bruce standing by, Chief White House Correspondent, just listening to what Avi just said. Mary, what does President Biden do at this moment?
Well, what I can tell you is what he is actually physically doing at this moment, and that is monitoring this unfolding from the Situation Room. He is there with Vice President Harris. We just received that information from the White House. He's receiving regular updates, of course, from his national security team. But also this, Kira, the White House saying the president has directed the U.S. military to aid Israel's defense against Iranian attacks and to shoot down missiles that are targeting Israel. Of course, we have heard from a White House official earlier today saying that a direct military attack from Iran against Israel will will carry severe consequences for Iran. What exactly that looks like, we still do not know. And as you were just discussing, of course, the president in the days leading up to this has been calling for a ceasefire, saying that while an all-out war is possible, the president was adamant we really have to avoid it. Of course, that is a hard sentiment to see how that is possible, given what we are seeing play out right now, Kira.
Steve Ganyard, what could the consequences be for Iran?
Well, Kara, I think that the White House has said that the Israelis have at least relayed to them that there will be economic targets. Remember that the real threat to Israel is the Iranian nuclear program, and that has been developing, and the ability for the Iranians to create what's called a breakout capability to be able to build a nuclear weapon in a short period of time is very close and very near at hand. You're seeing these ballistic missiles tonight raining down on Israel that theoretically could be the same kind of ballistic missiles that could carry one of those nuclear warheads. So as Avi was noting, at some point, this is going to have to come to a head, at least in the eyes of the Israeli government and the Israeli military, that they cannot continue to allow Iran to develop a nuclear weapon capability that would directly threaten Israel in the future. So there may be some attempts to go after some of the nuclear programs within Iran. The problem for Israel is that most of these nuclear programs and their centrifuges are buried very deeply. Israel does not have heavy bombers to carry deep penetrating warheads or the kinds of munitions that would be able to take out those nuclear facilities. So they can take out things around those nuclear facilities. They can take out the oil capabilities that the Iranian economy relies on. They can take out various parts of the regime. They can go after Khamenei himself. But the ability to take care of the real problem, which is nuclear weapons, is going to be quite a challenge for the Israeli military.
You mentioned Khamenei. I mean, is there a scenario here where Israel strikes the leadership of Iran before anything else, or does this go in phases? Does this start by taking down all communications, power plants, just daily functions for the country to run? Or is there a possibility here, depending on what happens inside Israel, that Israel may retaliate and go right for leadership?
Well, remember that they went after Nasrallah, and lots of people didn't think they were going to go after Nasrallah. So Khamenei apparently, right after Nasrallah was killed, went into hiding. And so Israel's ability to track senior leaders in Iran is not as good as it is to track Hezbollah leaders in Lebanon, which is right next door. So they would have the problem actually finding where he was. Remember that the distance between Iran and Israel is significant. It's the same distance as between Houston and Los Angeles. So the ability to fly airplanes and to be able to take real-time targeting is not the same as in Lebanon. So the challenge for the Israeli military is much greater in Iran. I do think, though, that what you're going to see is something where the Israelis are going to take their time. There's no need for them to rush. They can assess the damage, take care of what's going on. They still have a campaign going on in both Gaza and Lebanon. There's no rush on what they need to do in terms of retaliation. There will probably be discussions with allies, to include the United States, to make sure that the response does not go beyond the Iranian borders. But again, I think that there are all sorts of options, because the Iranian defenses are essentially helpless in the face of the kinds of military capabilities that the Iranians have, or the Israelis have.
Our Martha Raddatz, Chief Global Affairs Correspondent, on the phone with us now. Martha, we were just talking about Iran, how deep Israel could strike. What would be the plan, short-term, long-term, or is it an immediate action going straight toward the country's leader? We were talking about Khamenei in hiding. You have been to Iran several times. What are your thoughts as you are watching these live pictures? Does Khamenei continue to hide? Is he in any way carrying out instructions? What are your thoughts at this moment as we are watching just an unprecedented time right now, with fears of escalation, a wider war, and tremendous risk for both countries.
Well, Kira, I think being in hiding for Khamenei and many senior leaders is wise at this point. They have been watching what's happened with Hezbollah and Hamas and seeing what is happening. So we were told as of yesterday by a senior official that many of those leaders were already in hiding. I think they likely knew what was coming, certainly on their part, and they likely know what is coming now, so that will probably continue. Iran, as Steve rightly pointed out, doesn't really have the defense systems in place, and depending on what the Israelis try to strike, that will make a huge difference in perhaps we'll see another Iranian response. But right now, they know Hezbollah was vulnerable. Iran wanted their other proxy group, Houthis, to try and hit Israel. It didn't really work, and I think that's one of the reasons of many that Iran finally carried out these strikes themselves. And again, more waves are expected. They don't believe this first wave of strikes will end it. And you've also seen, and over the weekend, we talked to U.S. officials, and John Kirby in particular, about the United States wanting to de-escalate this situation, but we certainly have not seen that. I did ask John Kirby, who is the White House spokesman for national security, as you know, what he thought about them continuing the fight against Hezbollah and continuing to go after leaders and this ground incursion. And he said, we think they can de-escalate and go after Hezbollah all at the same time, because clearly Israel continuing the fight against Hezbollah felt that Hezbollah, and it certainly is vulnerable, that they should basically get them while they're down and take care of this. And again, this is retaliation for that. It's retaliation against Hamas, but they did get pressure from their proxies to do this kind of strike. And depending on the damage, that's when we will see how Israel will respond to this, but they will 100% respond to this. And not only if the missiles are intercepted, if all the missiles are intercepted, it's also just the shrapnel from interceptions that can cause damage. As I was saying earlier, I was just in Israel last week for about 10 days, and the atmosphere in Tel Aviv, there are thousands of people out on the street. And they haven't seen this intensity for a very long time. And the missile strikes, I was also there right after October 7th, and the air raids were constant. And today it has to be bringing them back to that moment there in Tel Aviv.
Martha, thank you. Let's get straight back to Tel Aviv. Our Matt Gutman, where the spokesperson for the IDF just put out a statement. Matt, what do we know?
Just a few moments ago, Kira, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, who's the chief spokesman for the IDF, as you just mentioned, went on TV, a national broadcast, announcing that for now, there is this all clear, telling people they can sort of begin moving out of those bomb shelters. He told them to stay close. He also said that some of those missiles apparently hit installations. We do not know, and he said they are not aware of any casualties at this point. That does not mean that there aren't casualties at this point. The one thing that he certified, and Martha just said it, is that there will be a response, that Israel has a plan. And typically what has been happening in the previous attacks, like the one against Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah in Lebanon last week, the IDF presents a series of options to the government. The cabinet sits over it, and then they decide what to do. That's what also happened with last night's incursion into Lebanon. So the plans are on the table. The question is, how far does the Israeli government want to take this? Just yesterday, Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke publicly in English, directing his comments to the Iranian people, saying that the regime could fall soon. And so one of the things that we've begun to hear from Israeli analysts at this point is a call for a strike on the Bandar Abbas oil port and terminal on the Persian Gulf in Iran. It's a huge terminal that controls much of the oil that goes into that country and out of that country. And if that is hit, that would cause catastrophic economic damage to Iran. And analysts are telling me it could possibly topple the regime. That's how significant it could be. That would be a major strike. They're also talking about attacking other possible energy installations as well. Again, this is a cabinet decision, as Steve said, and Martha as well. It does not have to be decided immediately. After the last round of missiles hit, Israel took a number of days, even longer, to retaliate. And then it was a very restrained response, essentially firing a missile from an airplane against an Iranian radar base, sending the message that Israel can hit whatever it wants, whenever it wants, without being detected. We know that it's not going to be that restrained this time, despite U.S. efforts and the Biden administration's incredibly energetic efforts in recent months to try to tamp down the tenor of the violence here. It's not going to be the case this time. A major question, though, is whether the U.S. assists in any attack on Iran at this point, and what kind of assistance that might be if it does happen. But clearly, the reprisals on the table. One more thing that Martha just mentioned. When you have that many missiles coming in, and we just had additional interceptors in Jerusalem a few minutes ago, it's not just the missiles that are being blown out of the sky, it's the interceptors that are exploding to hit them, causing a tremendous amount of shrapnel. And having been just north of Gaza when some of those rockets fired from Hamas were coming down and were intercepted, it was one of the eeriest experiences because you could hear the tinkle of falling shrapnel and metal on the rooftops as it's coming down. But now we're talking about bus-length missiles, and when they come down, it can create a significant amount of damage, even if high explosives don't detonate anywhere. So everybody here is still assessing. They're bracing for another possible wave, which we're told might happen. But right now, most importantly, we're hearing that the IDF, at least, is not aware of any casualties, Kira.
All right, so put this in perspective, just backing up to what you said at the very beginning about the IDF spokesperson saying that he's giving the all clear. It's okay to move out of shelters. However, a response is coming. Yep. What does that tell you? I even am looking at you. You now have your helmet off, and it seems that it's taken a little bit of a pause, I guess, with regard to immediacy, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll have Nikki, our cameraman, turn the camera and show you that traffic, if he can make it past our producer, Hugo, traffic is picking up. We haven't seen that in recent hours. There's a trickle of cars. People are starting to move about. Maybe they were cornered or stuck someplace, and now they're trying to get back home. Obviously, life is not returning to normal. Tel Aviv at this time of night is, as Martha mentioned, incredibly vibrant, even on a weekday. That is not the case now. And typically on a day like today, Kira, most people would be going to their families for the holiday, for the Jewish New Year. That's not happening right now, but people are starting to move around. You can see that there's a bit more confidence. Regarding the plan for the next attack, we don't know. And it could take days. It could even take longer. It depends how clear of a message and how big of a response there is. And a lot of it does depend on what kind of damage was caused by those missiles and those interceptors. But I can tell you one thing that has not happened, that I have not experienced in 25 years of covering this region. I've never seen a time when the major headquarters of the IDF in central Tel Aviv was evacuated. The major base for all of the intelligence, for Israel's version of the NSA, for the Mossad, for military intelligence north of Tel Aviv, was evacuated. Other bases around the country were. That is incredibly unusual. I think the only time that may have happened in the past was in 1991 when Iraq was firing Scud missiles. So this is a very unusual and uncommon event tonight. And you can tell the enormity of it by the Israeli preparation for this missile salvo. And of course, it's not yet over. So the next few hours are going to be very, very tense here as they wait for a possible second wave. We don't know if there is going to be one, though, Kira.
So bottom line, Matt, the Israel's Iron Dome has done its job thus far.
There's this three-layered system of anti-missile defense. It's the Iron Dome for more closer-range missiles. It's the Arrow and David Sling. It's this trio that works on different levels of the atmosphere, and they seem to have worked very well. But we've seen these videos, and I don't know if you've seen them coming in or if you're broadcasting them over me, but of massive amounts, swarms of missiles coming in, and it looks like some of them are making impact. It's unclear how many have landed, but we do know that those interceptors to try to knock those missiles out of the sky also went up in unprecedented numbers to try to eliminate that missile threat. Again, everybody's still in assessment mode here in Israel, Kira.
Matt, thank you. And Steve, drawing what Matt just said about what could be the next phase here, or what exactly will Israel do as it sits back, waits, plans what its retaliation will look like. And you mentioned this early on about oil and oil installations and targeting that versus the death of the supreme leader. How do you see this playing out? Do you see more of Israel going toward that type of strategy, just taking out Iran's economy capability to get by day to day, the money flow, the oil flow, versus rolling in hot and going for the supreme leader?
It'll probably be a combination of all of the above, Kara, because the Iranian economy and the Iranian government relies for about 40% of its income from oil. So you shut off that income, and things like basic services begin to go away, which will not make the Iranian people happy, which may be what Netanyahu is alluding to in terms of sort of fomenting an internal dissent that he thinks is closer to the surface than may appear. But I do think that it will be something that will be done with a combination of ideas. In other words, do you go after both the strategic leadership? Do you go after the economy? Do you go after the nuclear facilities? There are only a certain number of aircraft that can do that. The Israelis do not have the number of aerial tankers that the U.S. does, so they can't project power in the same mass that they can into Lebanon. But I do want to pick up on something that Matt said a couple minutes ago, and about the number of these incoming. So if you remember back in April, the Iranians were essentially humiliated in that the Israelis knocked down 99% of all the incoming weapons in that attack. They learned from that attack. I was just looking at one social video that's up on social media, and it shows I counted 25 impacts somewhere in Israel within 1 second. And so what the Iranians learned was that they had to overwhelm the Israeli defenses by launching all of these ballistic missiles at the same time. So that's what they learned from April, and it looks like that they succeeded, and many of these missiles may have gotten through. Don't know what that looks like. Now, we have been covering the ground war in Gaza, the ground war in Lebanon. Those wars are very infantry-centric. What goes on in terms of missile defense is something that you would see out of a movie. It's usually controlled in a big room, in a dark room with lots of screens. You have all sorts of radar feeding in data. You have multiple systems, as Matt alluded to. There's a three-tiered missile defense system within Israel. All of those computers, all of those inputs, all those radar inputs are being fused at one point. The computer is actually making the decision on when to fire on which targets automatically. So things are having to happen so quickly that it's really that the computers themselves are the ones that are defending Israel. And sometimes it's going to involve using U.S. ships. That may require voice communications, but this is all data link. It's all zeros and ones, and it's a very, very different war than what we see on the ground in Gaza or on the ground in Lebanon.
And again, how do you see the U.S. at this point playing a role? We already know that additional troops have been sent into the region. We know we have U.S. ships and capabilities out in the waterways. At what point does the U.S., I guess, pick up its role?
Here we're in election year. We're a month and a half out from a very tight election. I highly doubt that the Biden administration wants to involve U.S. Personnel in a shooting match with Iran at this point. It doesn't mean that the U.S. won't defend Israel, won't do anything that Iran won't defend anything that Iran does in terms of follow-on attack. But I highly doubt that the U.S. is going to get itself involved in direct attacks against Iran. I even highly doubt that they'll do things like provide tanker support to the Israelis just because they don't want to do anything to upset domestic politics. But again, the Israelis have the capability to do most of what needs to be done. They'll take their time, they'll pick their targets, and they'll have some sort of a strategy. But there certainly will be something, and it's going to be a news story leading all the way up to the U.S. elections.
It's going to be a volatile time for sure. just a little bit more than a month away, Steve. Let's take it back to our Ian panel, who's in Beirut. Iran now officially taking responsibility for these attacks. Ian, what more are we hearing from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard?
Yeah, I mean, no surprise, right? We knew that this was going to be coming from Iran. We had some questions, I think, for a number of days, especially after the assassination of Nasrallah, whether or not Iran would respond or whether it was afraid of the consequences. Well, they've certainly made their response very loud and clear. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps issuing a statement, as you say, saying that they were the ones who carried out this attack. They say that they targeted security and military targets. Also, the Iranian mission to the United Nations also issuing a statement saying that the attacks are a legal, rational and a legitimate response to Israel's attacks. And when they say Israel's attacks, they obviously mean Israel's attacks on its allies, the proxies, Hezbollah here, Hamas elsewhere, also the Houthis in Yemen. So there was some sense that this was coming. They are also issuing very strong warnings, cognizant of the risks that Israel is going to respond to, the very high risk that Israel is going to respond, warning them of devastating consequences if they do. And I think this is what's preying on everyone's minds right now. As Matt said, we don't know if there's another wave coming. Some of the statements seem to suggest that maybe that was the response. But we'll just have to wait and see, and the Israeli authorities will update us on that. But Daniel Hagari, the IDF spokesman, essentially saying that for now all things are clear for Israelis to go back out onto the streets. But yes, there are real concerns that if there is another wave, then there's a response, then there's a further retaliation, and every time this gets ratcheted up. Just to echo what Steve was talking about a minute ago, the United States, the Pentagon, has said that the US was involved in intercepting some of those Iranian missiles. So yes, defending Israel, but again, I think getting involved in anything larger than that, I think that's probably unthinkable at the moment. Israel has already laid out a broad spectrum of potential responses, from cyber attacks to physical attacks to maybe targeting specific individuals. They've been ready for this for a long time. They've been planning for this for a long time. And Israel has incredible intelligence in Iran. Logistically, it's very difficult, as Steve said, because it is so far away. It's not like launching attacks here in Lebanon and in Beirut or just across the border. That's very close and much easier for Israel to do. You need a lot of assets to kind of travel further and strike further. But nevertheless, they obviously feel that they do have a plan in place. I think there's absolutely no pressure on Israel. They can choose when they want to respond. Remember, we had that curious statement from Benjamin Netanyahu in this video address to the Iranian people just yesterday, where he talked about that they would be free sooner than they expected. Very curious choice of words, and telling the Iranian people, Persian people, as he called them, that there was a kinship between them and the Jewish people. But it was a clear threat to the Iranian leadership that change was coming. I think Israel thinks that Iran is a very brittle society. Economically, it's pretty devastated. Politically, any challenge to the regime, whether it's come from women protesting or it's come from more other kind of political parties, has been crushed by the regime. People suffer in Iran, without a doubt, and I think Israel's assessment is that that can be unpicked quite easily. I don't know that that's true, because Iran, like a lot of other authoritarian regimes, has been very successful about controlling its population. But if Israel goes after its economic assets, if it goes after its key leadership, if it disrupts the ability to conduct command and control, as it did with Hezbollah here, it was astonishing how quickly you could see an organization that looked almost unassailable unravel just in a matter of weeks. They had astonishing intelligence here. They are believed to have astonishing intelligence in Iran as well. It's just with Hamas in Gaza, that's where Israeli intelligence failed. But we're just going to have to wait and see what the fallout is, see if there are any casualties, what the impact has been of these strikes, and then hear from the Israelis about what their response is.
Ian, thank you. And the IDF spokesman, Daniel Hagari, just saying moments ago, there have been many interceptions, some impacts in central Israel and other areas. There will be consequences, and we have a plan. That's coming from the chief spokesperson for the IDF, Daniel Hagari. As Ian was saying, Israel definitely has a chance on how to respond to Iran's attacks, but everyday families cannot. Our Martha Raddatz has been talking to a number of those in Jerusalem, particularly those in families that have been in the shelters as we've been watching all of this fallout there in Israel. Martha, what are family members telling you at this hour?
You know, Kira, you have talked to me and Matt and Ian, and we are all used to being in areas like this and covering wars. But I know a young family, a young diplomatic family who just arrived in Jerusalem several weeks ago, and she texted me and said, "This is just intense." My husband said, "Incoming for real," and we scurried. We couldn't see anything because we were in our shelter. I made it a space room with a light that makes the ceiling different colors and stars, and put the kids' favorite movies on their iPads, but we could hear the sirens so loudly, and then the interception booms doing their amazing work. It's wild to plan for this, prep for this, know this can and could happen, but when we're on the floor holding the kids while the booms go off, it is a different perspective. That is a young American family who said, "We just got the all clear, thankfully, so we can leave now."
Martha, thank you.
To hear that perspective and realize that you can look at those interceptions, you can know what those missiles mean and where they can hit, but being with your scared little kids is a whole different perspective.
And it seems that this has become a part of their lives, particularly in the past year. Martha, there in Jerusalem. Martha, thank you. Let's take it back to our Matt Gutman. Matt, we are now in wait-and-see mode.
We are, and you can see the flak jacket's off, the helmet's gone. Israel has announced the all clear. We understand that there have been over 150, possibly 180 missiles that were fired. Traffic is going again, but the damage is still being assessed. And we're seeing these videos that are coming in, Kira, and they show that there were some installations that were hit. Also, not military installations. This is still unverified, but some of the videos we're seeing are very, very dramatic in terms of the destruction caused by some of these missiles. As Steve mentioned earlier, they can cause catastrophic damage, even if pieces of them fall, not only because of high explosives in them, but also because of the momentum they're carrying and the speed that they're traveling. Again, Israel is now bracing for the next round. Ian mentioned it also, this retaliatory cycle. It appears that that is where we are headed next. The big decision right now, Kira, is with the Israeli cabinet. They are going to get a menu of possible strike options against Iran in the coming hours and day or so. And at some point in the near future, I'm told, they're going to make a decision. We don't yet know what that will be. And we don't yet know how severe of a blow they want to level at the Iranian regime right now. But this was unprecedented, significantly more damage, significantly more missiles than we saw in the previous salvo in April, Kira.
And just as we are now in this wait-and-see mode, the options, Matt, that Israel has on the table, well, they have a lot of options, clearly. The question is, how much of a wider war could this turn into? The risks, the circumstances right now. Will Israel decide to hit those oil installations? Will Israel decide to hit infrastructure and all the surrounding ways that Iran survives and makes money? Or will Israel decide to go straight toward leadership and possibly Iran's supreme leader?
Unclear what they'll do. What we do know is that Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu, who has essentially been in power on and off for the past 15 years and in some control of the government for nearly 20 years, really since 1996, has had Iran in his sights since the start. He considers Iran enemy number one for Israel, not Hamas, not Hezbollah. Iran is the head of the snake, according to Netanyahu. He has been waiting for something like this, and to some degree, there are members of the Israeli cabinet and the government who see this as an opportunity to try to topple the Iranian regime, which has bedeviled them for so many years. They've tried to stop the development of the Iranian nuclear program. They haven't been able to do it. They may see this as their opportunity, but as Steve and others have mentioned, it's a long way from Tel Aviv to Tehran. Yes, Israel has demonstrated an incredible capacity to strike abroad, but Iran is much farther, much more complicated, and their nuclear facilities are much deeper and more entrenched, Kira.
Iran now launching a retaliatory missile attack targeting Israel. Right now, things seem to have calmed down. We are in a wait-and-see mode. Life for those in Israel, they've been told they can leave the shelters, but things can change at a moment's notice. We will wait to see what happens next. Our coverage continues on ABC News Live and abcnews.com. David Muir will be here with a complete wrap-up on World News Tonight, followed by live coverage of the vice presidential debate beginning at 8 Eastern. I'm Kira Phillips. Thank you for joining us for our special coverage as we continue to see what the fallout will be after Iran launching these missile attacks targeting Israel. We take you now to your regular programming.
This has been a special report.